So how did you come to the idea of the new film? What was like the gestation period of that?
I think that I think the gestation period was like the 30 years that I didn't want to do anything about being Jewish, you know, out of a kind of contrariness, but also just a kind of general, I don't really like identity politics. I don't really like people foregrounding their culture. I don't like people saying, as a whatever, I believe this. I don't like any of that sort of stuff that separates people. So I, and you know, there's also this weird thing about being Jewish where you're both of a different race and just a white boy. Like if you say you're just white, they'll go, aren't you Jewish? But if you say you're Jewish, they'll go, yeah, that's just white. So, you know, I just couldn't figure out a way to talk about it. And also, I guess I thought it was unseemly to just, like, that's private, you know, that's your business. And then, you know, and really, I didn't push to make the film. It was just I had a conversation with somebody. I knew they would like the idea. They want to do this application. Okay, like, what the hell? And then we got the money. Then it's like, but you know, I can't really. It's like I would often say. It's like we make the films that people say yes to. It's not necessarily the films that were our dying, you know, lifelong wish to make.
Well, let's talk about the structure a bit and what it is, because your comments about identity politics kind of speak to the fact that it starts as a film about, do you even mention that you're Jewish as a comedian or not? And then it kind of transitions from there. It seems like the structure is your own relationship with the topic that's being explored through these people. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I would say I think that this film is different than my other films, which are similarly personal. I have said, you know, it's true that when I stopped doing these mirror films, because I didn't want to be sort of typecast, or I didn't want it to be a gimmick. But had I continued, I probably would have made one about being Jewish. I probably would have made one about, you know, having a hard time losing weight. Like I would have, so I might have gotten around. Had I made that film back then, it would have been different than this one, because I generally consider my personal films to be actually collective stories in which my voice is part of the collective story. But I think in this film, I would have to admit that it's less a collective story and more really, on some level, about me, because the people in the film are not really necessarily agreeing with me or even expressing similar opinions, although some are. It's more, you know, how do you fit or not fit into this feeling I have? And if you don't fit, that's okay. Like, to me, you know, Jack Carter, while denying it, also is demonstrating it. Like, even he says a very small thing where he says Yiddishkeit is innate, or maybe it's in Irving. Like, he can't even say the name Nate without thinking of Irving, like, because Nate, you know, was a kind of name that a lot of Jews had back in the day. So, yeah, he can't help make essentially a Jewish joke while saying that Jewish humor is dead. So, yeah, so that it's sort of, yeah. So the film is, yeah, it's me talking to a bunch of Jewish comedians about, like, this feeling I have about how hilarious my grandparents were. That's what the film's about.
How did you select the archival stuff, though? So, because there is like a when in the title that we're talking about, which is in the past, and that's, I mean, you can't interview everyone you want, but you kind of have maybe more leeway with the archival material. How did you settle upon the few clips that you did?
Yeah, okay. I mean, partly, yeah, the archival is interesting. I mean, partly it's just a matter of what you can afford. You know, like a 3-minute clip from the Ed Sullivan Show is $8,000. And then there's like plus. And so yeah, you know what? I always have a mixed feelings. I'm curious what people feel about the archival footage in the film, because I don't like how archival footage is generally used in these kinds of, in historical films. I feel like it's just like, and then I worked with Sid Caesar, and then you just see Sid Caesar for 10 seconds in the middle of a thing. It's like, why did you bother? Like, you could have just had a photograph for all that I got from that. So on the one hand, I didn't want to do kind of like, and then I met this guy, and then you see that guy, because I wasn't making that kind of film. It is not a historical film. But at the same time, I wanted to use archival footage, and maybe I wanted to use it differently. So on some level, I feel like I used the archival footage structurally, almost in a way like I used to use my own mirror pieces. It was just something. It's like almost like the film is 5 acts, and they are separated by these archival pieces, and they're just there to take a rest and to show people who might not know what I'm talking about what I mean when I say that these comedians were Jewish. Like, even though, you know, when they talk that Jewish attitude, Jewish rhythms, you know, there's a guy in the film, it just was the luck of the draw. It's like I had one more place to fill, and I didn't have enough money to get who I wanted. But if you did Jackie Gleason show with $3,000 instead of $8,000, so we got the Jackie Gleason footage, and it was a bunch of guys, mostly I'd never heard of, including this guy Harvey Stone. But the guy Harvey Stone was so Jewish in a way, and so angry, and so ba-doom, ba-doom, ba-doom. I was like, okay, you're in. Like, even though people are like, who's that guy? You're right.
It's the deep cut.
Pardon me?
It's your deep cut.
Ah, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, the archival footage there is there as a kind of structural device, and as a kind of, you know, you would expect there to be cultural archival footage, so I'll give you some, and on some level it's even like a nod to sort of distributors, and like, oh, it's about Jewish comedy, is there archival footage? Yes. Okay. You like it, even if we don't use it the way they expect it to be used. So it was sort of, yeah, there was some demand to use it, and I had to find a way to use it that didn't, you know, like, again, I don't want it, like, I'm doing all these things that suggest to people it's a history of Jewish comedy, but it isn't, and I don't want to tease them, so I tried to use it in a way that would be satisfying to them and to me at the same time.
And going back to that topic of when and does it still exist, there's this concept of the old Jew that is different than just being an older Jew, and whether or not that can still exist, those characteristics. And what's interesting is all of the people you talk to, they're a range of ages, and they all seem to have different opinions on whether this still exists, including your own. So I was wondering if did you learn anything from that? Like, is there anything you've settled upon from making this?
Well, on some level, what I've settled upon, I don't think this is completely fair what I'm about to say, but I think there's some truth to it. I would say that the humor of the people in my grandparents' generation existed in all the people, and that the professional comedians simply refined it and did it kind of a professional version of it. Now I think the humor still exists in the Jewish comedians now are still, demonstrating that old Jewish humor, but the people aren't as much. So it's like, that's the thing. It's kind of, people say, I mean, whatever, the title was just meant to be cute and provocative, and it is provocative, but it's not meant to be a thesis. And so it's sort of like, when Jews are funny, does that mean Adam Sandler's not funny? Well, maybe he isn't funny, but I'm not saying he isn't funny. Andy Kindler, who's in the film, and I'm proud to call him a friend. The first time I saw him on TV, he said one thing, and I was like, oh, Jewish humor's back. And immediately I interviewed him for Curmudgeon, and by the time I saw him again for When Jews Were Funny, Andy to me is as funny as Alan King or Buddy Hackett or anything. He's as funny. Also, he's not that young. I mean, he's in his 50s, but still, he's as funny. But I don't think that his, he was the one who turned me on to Ed Krasnick, who I'd never met, and I loved Ed, and I almost would like to make a film just about Ed. And he's in a weird way like the heart and soul of the film for me. Okay, he's hilarious, but I'm just saying, my wife works at Steele's in Bathurst. Sometimes I drive her to work. There are Jewish delis there, and I go in there, and yes, I vaguely recognize that everybody there is Jewish. I hear the odd sort of inflection. It's like, oh, you're Jewish. But I don't hear the, like, you know, the thick air of complaints that's what I miss.
Yeah.
You know? That's why my favorite joke in the film is just a throwaway line that Mark Schiff mentions. He's like, oh, do you know that joke? The waiter comes over to the table of Jewish women and says, is anything all right? That, to me, that's like, you know, that's not there anymore. And for obvious reasons, why would it be there? You know?
But that refers to another joke as well, which is is it the train joke about the water? Because it could be, like, there's the thesis that we won, and that's why this cultural shift has occurred. There's this, like, dispersion, this integration that's kind of diluted things. But on the other hand, there's the joke of once you get the water, there's still the complaint. Like, so it suggests that there could still be that.
I think that younger Jews still, it's like they were instilled with the feeling, but without the experience to back it up. So they're still on some level, you know, mimicking that feeling, but they're not. You know, their backup is shallow. If you know, and you know, it's like an interesting thing. My mother, when I was a kid, used to say this expression, "Knena hora." I had no idea what it means. It was just a bunch of syllables. It's a sound. I don't know what, is that one word? Is that 4 words? And she would use it when she would say, oh, that's a nice dress, Knena hora. And I thought it meant, oh my God, that's a nice dress. Isn't that a nice dress? No, Knena hora means, is not, it means something like no evil eye. So she's saying, that's good. Now I'm invoking the evil eye because I know that when one says something good, they have to immediately, like, say, don't kill me. You know? My grandmother, when she said Knena hora, she knew that even a moment of complacency or contentment lulled you into a false sense that would, you know, you wouldn't be as, when the Cossacks come, she wouldn't be as ready because she was kind of happy. So that was their lives. Nowadays, of course, it's not any. Jews are, for the most part, you know, they have no idea what that is. They're kings of the world, and we control the money in Hollywood, so and even the Canadian documentary business. But yeah, so that's all I'm saying is that, you know, whatever. It's like, I hate to say this, but do you like Gary Clark? He's this young black blues guy. It's like, you know, whatever. It just doesn't work anymore. It's like, I like, you know, young black blues guys playing bottleneck guitar and doing Sunhouse. It's like, sorry, like you mean like the mimic? Yeah, it feels like mimicry, right? I mean, you know, weirdly, it sort of reminds me. It's like getting off on a tangent. I liked English blues. I liked Savoy Brown. They don't sound like Muddy Waters at all, but the ones that are, there's this revivalist thing where and for some reason, weirdly, it's like vaguely racist, but somehow the young black guys doing Robert Johnson even bug me more than the young white guys. It's just whatever. You can't pull it off. Don't bother. You're a cover band. You know, maybe that's, you know, young Jews. That's whatever. They're covering these old jokes, but they're not feeling them.
Would the other option be more of the Andy Kindler kind of deconstruction, like the meta, like he's both performing it and engaging it? That's true. I don't know. That's a good way to put it. He's like, you know, I said to him one time, it's almost like he goes extra Jew to protect himself from, it's like he says something really Jewish, and then before you can say that's really Jewish, he takes it up the next level to pretend he's making fun of it, to hide the fact
that he was just really Jewish there.
Well, it's like when you ask him to do the accent, and he's putting on the accent, but it really just sounds like him speaking a little louder, like it is still him. Like there's no real difference.
No, yeah. Anyway, I mean, and all this stuff, like I just want to make it clear that this is how I feel about, I lament the sound that it's not even my actual grandparents, but their generation. I miss that sound. I'll never get it back. If you think Jews are still funny, you still might like the film. If you think I'm full of shit, you might still like the film. And also, really, you have to say this clearly because there's a big thing. If you're not Jewish, you'll still like the film, I hope. Like, I didn't make it for Jews, and I'm offended by the notion that I did. And
Well, now comedy is a market, like the discussion of comedy, so that's another aspect. And what I'm curious is how you said that there were some people you couldn't get, and you don't need to name names, but I'm curious if there were any like people that you specifically wanted to bring up a certain subject that because they weren't there that was lost, or was it just all the same thesis that?
No, the only person, there's probably two people, maybe four. There's two people that I wanted that I thought would be good for the film and good for me to meet and good to talk to, and they were Mel Brooks and Sarah Silverman. So I thought Sarah Silverman would be interesting because she's out front as a Jew, and she does all this sort of overtly, she makes fun of racism, and I thought that I definitely think that is an outgrowth of her being Jewish. And then Mel Brooks I wanted because first of all, I think he's the funniest of all of them, and he wasn't a stand-up. And because the 2,000-year-old man character is like it's just an old Jew. Like, I don't know, and the fact that non-Jews love that character, they're talking about his grandfather. Like, and then also Mel Brooks because I have a very strong childhood memory of the first time I saw my father like laugh so hard I thought he was having a heart attack. And that was from Mel Brooks on this, what has now become a famous episode of David Suskind's show. But as it turned out, I think it was a blessing that I didn't get. Oh, and then just for my own thing, I wanted to meet Gary Shandling, and I thought he would be at a moment in his career when he would do it. And then I guess I wanted Richard Lewis too. And also, when we interviewed David Brenner, he phoned Richard Lewis and said, "You got to do it." So it was like, oh, we're going to get Richard Lewis, but he didn't do it. But at the same time, just to be honest, if Shecky Green had to be in the film because he was Shecky Green, Jack Carter, etc., David Steinberg, etc. The people that were famous, Howie Mandel actually I think has never been funnier, but the biggest stars had to be in it. And if I had another 10 big stars that had to be in it, I wouldn't have been able to make the film I made because, in general, the stars were not as helpful in telling the story as the lesser stars were. So it's a blessing that I didn't get Jerry Seinfeld and Jon Stewart and Woody Allen. Woody Allen also would have been great, if he would do it. But it's just one of those things when you make a documentary, it's like, on the one hand, big stars will do your film for free, but on the other hand, most of them won't.
Now, it seems like a really poignant moment comes in the credit sequence, and I'm curious about that because that's where it kind of, there's some moments where you're called self-obsessed by, who was that? Moni? Is that the name? Moni, yeah. And it kind of moves in that direction, but it seems like the most revealing moments come in the credits. Why were those like kind of set aside? I know you do that in some of your other films as well.
Well, it's weird. I do feel guilty about, like in 15 Reasons to Live, I did a little thing in the credit sequence, and I do feel, I have mixed feelings about that because it's sort of like not your film, but it is your film. So, but in this one, it's just like, I had to end the film where I ended it. I couldn't go another second. Like Shelley sings a song. Then he explains what the song what he said. He translates it, and I had pressure from people. Oh, it's like, yes, he has. Now when he explains it, I'm like, no. When he finishes the song, the film is over. That's it. So then it was just like this little emotional extra thing with my daughter and I. Just it had to go there. If the credits, if the film ends and you don't see that, I think you had an ending already. And if you do see it, it's like, I mean, of all the sort of times in my life I might use that technique of a little thing in the credits, I think that was the perfect. I think it's just like that extra little melancholy moment. Then I, of course, after that we put in Shelley explaining the song, and really now, like, yeah, I don't think I needed to. And then there's a thing with Bob Einstein, which is hilarious, but it is a weird thing. It's just a weird thing, this like using the credits as part of your film but not part of your film. I do think it's a questionable technique, but I took a shot. Like, if somebody were to criticize me on that, I would feel like, yes, that's a legitimate criticism.
Another interesting technique that ties into Bob is that when you include in your films interview subjects not really understanding what you're going for or even the question. And I'm curious, that seems like it's interesting for a number of reasons. One, because it brings you into it in a way that maybe is more active than people would be expecting, but also, I mean, it could maybe make them look bad if the viewer feels like you're pretty clear and they're not getting it. What is the kind of balancing act of those?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I've put things in previous films that vaguely embarrass me because people like it. It's just, and because it's sort of, like in Curmudgeon and Andy Rooney at this moment. And the thing is, I just thought, okay, in a sense, he is being the true curmudgeon there. How can I not put that in? And also, I don't really feel bad about him making fun of me, although I have to tell you that it's like when I think it's so unexpected that you would fall on your sword in your own film that occasionally people don't even know that you did that. And they'll be like, that guy's making, in the Q&A, it's like, that guy's making fun of you, don't you? And it's like, oh, shit. I watched it 1,000 times with, and I never picked up on that. Of course I knew. I think that one of the reasons I used it in When Jews Were Funny is because, when I made films that had a personal subtext or a personal content, and I was in them, physically in them, my face was in them, then I knew that the audience had a way of knowing who that person was. When I made a film like that, where I didn't want to appear in it, then you get into this area of how do you become a character in a film purely by being the interviewer and the filmmaker. So there's just various opportunities you have to like make them go, oh, this guy's, I mean, if you enjoy Bob Einstein making fun of me, then you have implicitly accepted that I'm a character in the film. So, and I never have had a problem with the person off screen being a character in the film, but at the same time, there's been a very strong taboo for many years of even including your off-screen comments. Questions. Like, you never hear the interviewer's voice. And that I feel like that taboo still vaguely holds on. So, I've had people say, like, you can't do that. You can't not appear. And I'm like, well, how am I going to appear? I'm not Michael Moore. I don't come around with the camera. Like, there's no point. I am the off-screen character. I believe that the audience can develop some relationship with that person asking the questions, even though they don't see them. But anything I can do to reinforce or cement that, I'll do. And then there's just the fact that it's funny. It's funny. It's funny to see somebody making fun of somebody. Also, it's very Jewish, So their testiness seems very Jewish. So, that's why I included it.
The off-screen voice kind of speaks to something that's in a lot of your films, and to the point that it comes up literally, which is the therapy element, like the therapeutic quality of conversation. And conversation is a topic in the film as well. Like, there's an association with Judaism and talking about these things and telling these stories. And I was wondering if that's something that you feel is necessary to have the voice in there, because ultimately it's your pursuit, this question. It's not
right.
It's not necessarily universal. It could be, but
yeah. The main reason that I include my voice in my films is because it's like I'm not a professional interviewer. And so when I started making these films, and when I made vinyl, like, I spent the first month at home shooting the stuff in the mirror because I was literally afraid to interview. I didn't know what that would be like, and that's why I put myself in the film in the first place, because I was afraid that the best stories and the best stories that I like, nobody would give me, so I had to tell them. So, and when I started to interview people, I just started doing the thing where it was just a conversation. I would be as aggressive with them as I might be in any conversation. And then that is just like when we cut it together, it was just sort of like, we felt like we just invented this way of telling a story. So I didn't change it, but I come to realize, well, one of the reasons, there are certain techniques that people have for taking their voice out. So this sounds technical, but I think it's worth talking about. You ask me, what do you have for breakfast? And I say eggs, and you go, okay, say it again, but this time say, I had eggs for breakfast, so I can take my question out. Well, people have done that to me, and when they do that to me, I'm like, you know what, let's end the interview right here, because I was having a conversation with you, and now I'm an actor in your thing. So I'm interviewing people often who've never been interviewed, and who are pretty intimidated. And I just don't want to do anything to remind them that they're being interviewed, or that I need something from them, or that there's any agenda. I don't want to make them repeat something, and I don't have notes, I don't look down. I just was like, I'm going to take a chance. Did you ever have this experience? Yes. Good. I have to leave my question in. So on some level, whatever, necessity was the mother of something. I have to do it that way. So it's almost like I designed the film around the fact. At first, I think unknowingly, but after a while, I became aware that, it is what I do. So if you're going to hear that guy ask a question, you might want a slight clue to the point of view with which that person is carrying into this interview.
It's funny that you mentioned the people that have never been interviewed before, because one thing I came across when I was doing research was that people have a lot of problems with vinyl in particular, where you don't list the names of who you're talking to, because I guess in some cases they're like relatively bigger names, and sometimes they're not. And now you've reached a point where you're making a film that does fit kind of in the talking head mold, where you've got the names, they're listed. Is this something that is a consideration of yours, like a concern? Like, do you want to?
Right. Well, in the beginning, I didn't want to put the names, partly because, do you put the names of your neighbor? Like, you only put the names of famous people, and then, who's that guy? Well, that's my neighbor, and then if you put the name of one famous person, and then you put Mike Cartmel, my friend, next, they'll go, should I know him? And they'll be Googling, and they'll think everybody's famous, and I'm just like, also it's like, in I Curmudgeon, I had Mark Eitzel. Well, Mark Eitzel is one of my heroes, but but whatever, he's not nobody knows who that is.
At least it's visually distinctive. I caught on who it was.
But I mean, so yeah, that's why I did it, because it's sort of, I just feel like if I put the names, I would be joining a tradition that I didn't want to join. And when it came to When Jews Are Funny, I think that since everybody was on some level famous, then it was fine to put the names. Because I was, you know, I mean, not everybody was famous, but I have a friend in it, and so, but there's like, almost everybody is famous in some way, and so that's why you know, people suggested that I put their name every time, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But I think that, yes, I know people have that complaint, and I'm baffled by that complaint, because what do you care?
Yeah.
What do you, like, you want to appreciate the film on another level than the film I'm making. Ooh, it's that guy. Like, you know, if you know who it is, good. If you don't, it's another guy in my film. And so, yeah, I don't know. That, I'm telling you, that is just weird that to even remember that people do that, because it's just like, you know, what do you, that's so you, I'm robbing you of that moment of going to your husband, hey, that's, you know, like,
Bruce LaBruce,
you know,
for like
yeah, Bruce
2
LaBruce,
seconds.
you know, like, yeah. But I mean, yes, I knew I was going to do that thing that people always asked me to do in When Jews Were Funny.
Yeah.
And I felt like if there was ever, you know, that was appropriate. But it's funny that you say that makes it more Talking Heads. I feel like everything I've done is Talking Heads.
Yeah, but like the mold, right? Like
Yeah.
what people, and I think that's probably why they have that problem, is they're so conditioned to expect a certain thing.
Yeah. A lot of stuff I did on vinyl was the opposite of stuff that I didn't like. You know, I had 50 people in the film because I felt like anybody else would make that film, they would have 3 people. I just was sick of we're going to do a film about firemen, 3 firemen. We're going to do a film about whatever, it's always 3. And first of all, that means if it's 90 minutes, they're each in the film for half an hour. And sometimes you get a hit off somebody in 30 seconds, and you're like, I got you, move on. You know, you're not going to tell me anything like, wow, that was a great story, I don't need to see you anymore. So I would add 100 people in it if I could. Also, I think I wanted to, you know, like I wanted to say, hey, record collecting is not the thing that 3 weirdos do. It's like probably your neighbor does. Probably you know 10 people with 1,000 records, they just haven't told you. Anyway, maybe that's off topic.
So with the last 2 features in particular, apart from getting rid of the mirror, it seems like there's an aesthetic shift. And I know in the start of 15 Reasons to Live, you outright say this. You've got the shot going over the bridge, and you're narrating it because you're talking through new formal devices that you're using. And I'm wondering if you could expand on that and how you see your aesthetic shifting from the early films to the later ones.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, that's a hard thing to talk about. You know, when I went to make I, Curmudgeon, I realized, when I was making vinyl, I have shots of people showing their records, which I was not using that as B-roll because the film is jump cut like crazy, so it's not like I was using these shots to mask the jump cuts, which is why they're usually used. But I did have cutaways. By the time I did I, Curmudgeon, I had been made aware by documentary professionals that what I was doing was all wrong. I was jump cutting and there was no B-roll. And so I just thought, okay, well, what B-roll could there be? And then I realized there couldn't be any. There's nothing I could use, like pictures of angry people. I don't, you know, like I just couldn't think of anything. And also I didn't want to do, again, I was trying to avoid that sort of them walking to the store, them walking down their street, them walking towards the camera thing. So I had no B-roll in that film. And then Lovable, we started playing around with, I realized that I had never shown people on some level, since it was going to be the last time I was going to do this, I wanted to make people aware that there was some work involved in setting up the mirror. So I did some stuff like that. So it is kind of a B-roll thing. But I have to say that B-roll, or what people call B-roll, is one of those sort of film techniques that I have never really made my peace with. So, you know, again, when Jews Were Funny, when it came along, it was like, what would the B-roll be? I couldn't figure. So, okay, I can't figure out what it would be. Like, what would be appropriate? What would be not distracting? So I couldn't think of anything. So there's no B-roll. I think, I put it down to this, as a kind of deep background thing. At a certain point in my early days, a friend of mine, essentially, he didn't mean to criticize me, but he basically said, "You're a storyteller rather than a visual filmmaker." And so I tried to prove him wrong. I made one film, Stealing Images, which I dollied all over the place, and it was made a fairly pretty, well shot film. And then a number of things happened to make me kind of lose faith in myself, and I had the opportunity to make a film that really shouldn't have been made because it was deeply uncinematic. And I was like, I'm going to prove that guy wrong, and I'm going to, cinematic the hell out of this uncinematic thing. And I did, kind of, but also it just didn't work. And after that, there was kind of like, screw that. Like, maybe I'm not visual, whatever. I'm a filmmaker, but I'm not visual, how some narrow definition that I think people have a visual. I think a guy talking is visual. I don't think B-roll is more visual than somebody talking. But I don't know. It just, something happened. I was just like, from now on, I'm not going to worry about that. When it came to 15 Reasons to Live, I realized that you could only make that film with lots of B-roll. There was no way. I had to find. Here I was making a film where from the beginning, I was going to tell 15 stories, one after the other, like a list. I was not going to intercut them in any way. I was not going to weave them, a technique which I've used in all my other films and which works like a charm. I wasn't going to do that. I was taking that arrow out of my quiver. I was going to tell one story after another. That should not work. But what can I do to make them feel like one film connected? I'm going to do everything that I can to make the film feel like one film, short of the most obvious one, which would be to intercut them. So I just decided if I shoot a lot of B-roll and use a lot of B-roll and also probably a little more music than you would normally use, I might get away with doing this thing, which was structurally, utterly ill-advised. So that's the film where, and on some level also, I was just sick of people saying that I'm incapable of doing this, so I did it. But I mean, I'm not, there's some nice B-roll, there's some very conventional B-roll in it. There's nothing, none of the B-roll is like, Bertolucci. It's just B-roll. There's the woman, she lives in a lighthouse. It's beautiful on Georgian Bay. How are you going to not shoot a nice shot of a lighthouse on Georgian Bay? But it's not like, there's nothing special about it. But we just did as much as we could, and I think it contributed to this film that on some level shouldn't have working. But I don't think there's a real change in my aesthetic. I don't think there is. I think that I have filmmaking chops that can be applied to anything, but there probably is something I'm better at. And so I'm probably best at doing these sort of personal talking heads films, but I don't intend to only make them.
Hard Name seems to stand out a bit for that reason, because it seems the one that you're in the least. It does also feature some B-roll. I mean, you're going around shooting. It seems like it has those conventional documentary qualities. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that film as something that kind of stands out in its themes, its aims.
Yeah, A Hard Name was probably the film that I thought, it was the first film I made that I wasn't in, let alone in the mirror, and I thought that probably, as I started, I thought, okay, this is how I'm going to make films from now on. It's going to be similar, it's going to be collective stories, it's going to be similarly intercut, it's going to be multi-characters, it's going to be interview, but I won't be in it. Because I'm not an ex-con, and I have nothing to say about being an ex-con. But what I found was that even in that film, it helped to have an intermediary there for the audience to relate to. I think there was something about these characters and how, scary they were in a way, and how off-putting they were in a way, that if the audience knew that somebody like them was in the room talking to them, they'd go, oh, okay. Or even they would think, wow, that guy's so brutal, but he's kind of charming. And they would see, I'm charmed by him, that they would go, okay, I can be charmed by him. So, and then also it's just like, I needed, people would say really horrible, sad things, and I needed a pause. And so I just was like, what techniques do I have to pause? Well, some was B-roll, and sometimes I would ask a really long question. So it's weird, that one I feel like, wow, what are you doing in that film? But that one was a kind of classic, it's not a personal film, but the director as interlocutor is a character in the film on some level. And I probably would do that again if I made another film like that.
Given the nature of these films all having these strong characters in it that I'm sure audiences respond to, do you get a lot of questions about what's happened to these people in these films, where their stories have gone since?
I do get, I do. I mean, I don't get that as much about I Curmudgeon, people don't go, is that guy still negative? But the people do say vinyl, does that guy still collect records? And from Lovable, people definitely ask, are they still single? And people are most concerned with how the people in A Hard Name are doing. And because I think they really come out of the film wishing the best for these people, hoping they stay out of jail, hoping they find some peace, and which is a strange thing to feel about criminals. And I saw two of the people, I saw three of the people in the film I just saw a few weeks ago, and they're still out of jail. It's 4 years, 5 years since I interviewed them, and then two of the people in the film have died, and then two of the people in the film, they're not in jail, but I'm not going to say they're doing that well. So, that film was really special to me. I'm not sure I'll ever do anything like that. When I finished it, I really thought, you know what? I'm going to just make films about crime and criminals and prison and the rest of my life. But then I pitched like a bunch of them and I got turned down. I was like, okay, I guess I'm not going to do that. But I would be happy to do that. I think that's an extremely rich vein for documentary, because it's so well covered in fiction, but so uncovered in documentary.
And you have that balance of these characters, but there's also, you're kind of exposing certain qualities that, the general public doesn't know about, specifically with like the legal system or the...
Yeah, one interesting thing about that film that happened was that it premiered on a Friday, and on Saturday I ran into this woman I know who works for the Attorney General, and she told me that after the film screened, these tweets went out to everybody in the Attorney General's office that this is a film they have to see. And when I said to her, really? Because you guys deal with criminals all the time, like, I would not think that you would be the ones most interested. She said, yeah, but we don't hear them tell their stories. We deal with them in such a specific way. We never hear them talk about their lives. We never hear them talk like that. So, I mean, that's just like a really simple documentary thing. It's like bringing stories that we don't normally hear. And, we have a lot of stuff about criminals and crime, but we never hear them really talk. And I think it was really moving when they did. In fact, a friend of mine just wrote that even if Rob Ford did kill the guy, he's going to feel for him because of my film, which I think is taking it too far.
Your films all have kind of thematic links at points, but they're also distinct. But you mentioned that you wanted to continue down a specific vein, and it just didn't work out. Is that something you're conscious of, the idea of varying the subject matter versus being consistently down one specific path?
I don't know. I think that I feel like I'm not good at coming up with subjects for films because I feel like I don't know. It's like I'm always jealous of everybody else's idea. Oh, I wish I'd had that, because I have this image that there are these sort of perfect documentary subjects, and I never come up with them. It's like one way to express it is that I couldn't pitch any of these films. If I had to pitch them, they'd be like, "Who are the characters?" I don't know. I haven't met them yet. What's it about? I don't know. I haven't talked to them yet. Just trust me because I did it before. No, that doesn't work. So I always feel like I wish I could just say, it's about, we'll meet this person and he will walk across Canada, and when he's finished, he will change and they'll go home. Perfect documentary. Except probably it should be a she, but otherwise. Yeah, like I just never have those ideas, and I'm always thinking, will I ever have those ideas? And I'm always kind of waiting to have one of those ideas, but in the meantime I have to pitch something, and then I pitch 10 ideas, and then they say yes to the one I like the least, and then you're making that film, and then 2 years later people say, why did you really want to make that film? And I really didn't, but I really wanted to make another film.
Yeah.
And I do, on some level, feel like, I love filmmaking. I love the process of filmmaking. I really don't care what the film is about. I don't care if all my 6 films had been 6 different films. I just care, I'm not attached to the subject, which is sort of what documentary is spoken of too much, like, I made this film. Why did you spend your whole life wanting to make this? No, I wasn't even interested in it when I first got the gig. Like, I just tried to make a good film. So, I've always been, I've always, it's like, after I made vinyl and I thought, how can I do this again? What other aspect of my character could be a film? And I had this idea for Curmudgeon, because I'd had an experience that I talk about in the film. And some friend of mine said, oh, that's, you, with vinyl, you had the luxury of having text and subtext. The film was ostensibly about vinyl, but it was really about other things. That's, in this film, what's the text and the subtext? It's like a film about subtext. And I was like, yeah, that's fucked up. Okay, that's a real challenge. So every film, I feel like every film I've made, it's just been the challenge, the feeling of, oh, this is impossible, this is a crazy idea, but I think I can do it, that has influenced me, or has driven me the most. I feel now like I don't want to do that anymore. I feel now like I would just like to make a film that I do know it could be good and try to just make it excellent, just like use my craft. That was sort of, 15 Reasons was sort of an exercise in, do I have chops or don't I? And if I do, then I'll try to use them in other places. I don't feel the same need to prove anything or to myself either. But at the same time, probably, the best laid plans, I'll just end up in the, I'll have this idea, and then they'll have the one that's like my other films, and that's the one they'll go for. But I there was no plan, and it was pretty random, and the fact that one can look back and see consistencies, well, that makes sense because I made them all, but there wasn't a plan.
The one thing that I always notice in them is the subject of filmmaking and films. I was curious if you would ever make, like, that would be a real challenge, I guess, because it's the kiss of death to make a film about filmmaking, but it's so consistent in all of your films.
Yeah, well, that's I would like to, I mean, that's true. It's like, how would you make a film about this? That you know, I can't remember. Oh, I know. I thought about something the other day. You know, this is a good example. I was talking to my friend about like politics and the Tea Party and things like that. And we started talking about the South and doing road trips in the South. And I started talking about the fact that you can pull into the smallest southern town. I know this is a long way to go to make a point, but you can pull into a small southern town and talk to a guy. That guy can talk with idioms so refreshing that you want to write them down. It's like poetry. And the guy's a lawyer, and he's talking like Faulkner, and then he says, oh, that reminds me, and he pulls out a guitar, and it's like the best flat picking you've ever heard. And then that guy's in favor of like changing the sodomy laws back, you know, making sodomy illegal, and he's for, you know, he voted for, you know, the Tea Party, and it's like he's like a racist pig and also the most beautiful human being you've ever met. And I was like, can I make a film about that? Probably not, but I'm thinking about it. That seems impossible, way too big. It probably should be a fiction film. But, you know, what could happen is I could say that and a producer could overhear it and talk to a broadcaster, and then he'd go, do you want to make that film? And then you'd be making that film. That's what happened with A Hard Name. Like, I didn't pitch A Hard Name. I saw something on TV about Alcatraz. In it, there was this prisoner who was the last guy that got out of Alcatraz. He was an old ex-con. And I just said to Michael McMahon, that's interesting. And then somebody asked Michael, what is Alan doing next? And he said, well, he told me this thing. And then next thing, you don't talk about film, like, especially in the documentary world. It's, you know, you never talk about filmmaking. It's all about either the business or the subject. All they want to talk about is the subject. And it's like, you know, you want to talk about the subject? Talk to that guy who's an expert on the subject. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm moving on now, but I'd love to talk about filmmaking. I like to talk about editing, you know, like, and yeah, I like to talk about constructing a story. I like to talk about storytelling, not about what the story was on some level. So, anyway, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. Do you have a next project lined up, or is it something that you're still ruminating?
I don't. I put in a development application for something that I sort of don't want to do, but it's a leftover idea that probably is sort of sticking in my craw. And I don't want to do it because it's just a repetition stylistically. But again, if I got the money, I guess I would do it.
Yeah.
And then I'm most excited to do that. I have a film about one guy, and I met him recently, and I have his permission. I guess I just don't want to jinx it by saying who that person is, although not that everybody would know, but some people would know. Yeah, I don't know. You know what? I mean, I feel, for the first time, I feel a little bit of pressure from winning that prize at TIFF, because I feel like there's more attention, and I should do something with that attention. And if I just make A Hard Name Part 2, it'll be like, oh, you know, like I just, you know, it's only now really that I would say I have a career. You know, at 61, I have a career, and I would like to have a career. At the same time, I'm not gonna, I mean, I've often said I would sell out if somebody would let me, but nobody will hire me. I've literally had people, I had a guy at this TV station telling me, such a weird thing to say. He said, you have to protect your brand. And it's like, no, I don't. Like, why are you I don't want to protect even the fact that he used that word brand.
Yeah.
Like, that's a word that was so disgusting when you first heard it, and now people just say it, like, you know. Brand
management, that's,
so I don't want to protect my brand. I want to make bigger. I can't even break out of this budget thing that I'm in. You know, both When Jews Were Funny and my other film were imagined under 15 Reasons, for sure, under the idea that we would get that next level of budget and I'd be able to tell stories from around the world. No. So, you know, I mean, like, all I really want, I like making films. I want to make more films. I want to make, 5 more before I die or something like that. But I hope I can, I don't know, yes, I do feel weirdly like this is the most attention I've ever had. And, ironically, for a film that I was very, very, very worried about. I mean, I'm not lying at all when I thought it was when I say I thought it was my worst film, and when it got into TIFF, I was like, oh, yeah. I'm in TIFF with my worst film, but, with all the attention it's gotten and all that, it probably will be seen more than any of my other films, and it's probably made me vaguely more well-known, or my name is out there. I would like to figure out how to capitalize on that, but I don't know how to. I don't even, I can't even conceive what that would be, except to do something fictional. And actually, I'm trying to go back to fiction, but I'm not sure that that's a career move either. I don't know what that would be, but I'd like to. I'd like to. I don't know. Yeah, people often say you should do a sequel. Do a sequel to Vinyl or something like that. I'm not going to do that, but maybe that would be a career move, but that's definitely not going to happen.
It's that scene in Lovable where you're just transcoding everything.
Yeah. No, because Vinyl's back, so people would say, this is again, just a bit of a stretch, but that I've been waiting for 13 years since Vinyl came out for somebody to do the film that is about record collecting that my film isn't about. And if you go on YouTube, you can actually see that there are a whole bunch of attempts, but still hasn't been done. It's like, well, maybe I should do it, but actual film about record collecting, professionally done rather than these. But no, but that's a gig. So I'd do that if you paid me, but that's not gonna be an idea I'm gonna have.
That's a good place to end it. Thanks, Alan.